On the evening of December 10th, 2025, the United States witnessed a moment no one could have predicted. Lakewood Church, an icon of hope and of widely broadcast sermons, welcomed its audience as usual. The lights were on, the cameras were ready, and thousands of people awaited a familiar service. Yet behind that bright setting lay a palpable tension. Because tonight's guest was entirely different. A young president from West Africa, stern, quiet, but commanding. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere changed instantly. Many wondered, why is he here? Others asked, what message does he want to deliver to the world? And what unfolded next would shake the United States and pose a profound challenge to the global church. To better understand the truth behind this historic encounter, please like and support the Africa World News channel and stay tuned for what happens next. When the broadcast began that night, Lakewood Church looked more like a television center than a place of worship. The lights were bright, the stage was prepared, and cameras from major networks such as CNN, Fox, ABC, BBC, and Al Jazeera were all present. Stations across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia were also watching live. Everyone understood that this evening would not be normal. Inside, more than 10,000 people filled the seats. Some came for faith, some came out of curiosity because of online rumors that a controversial leader would appear. Others wondered why a foreign president had been invited at all. Yet everyone waited as Joel Osteen stepped forward, just as he always did, friendly and confident. He had barely begun speaking when all attention shifted toward the side door, and then the main figure appeared. A young president from West Africa walked in, with a serious face, no smile, no greeting. He stood straight and silent, completely different from Lakewood's usual atmosphere. The room fell silent. Joel Osteen introduced him politely. The audience clapped lightly, but their applause was filled with uncertainty. Some looked at him with suspicion, others wondered why he was here. They did not have to wait long for an answer. Standing at the podium, he delivered the first sentence that stunned the entire hall. "I did not come here to entertain you." The mood changed instantly. He said he did not need applause, did not seek praise, and did not come to create a good feeling. He came to speak the truth, and he pointed out a major problem in American megachurches: faith being turned into a product to attract crowds instead of being centered on sacrifice and service. Christ did not die to create wealth. Some people were shocked, some nodded, others grew uncomfortable. Then he spoke directly to Joel Osteen. Hope without truth is deception. He argued that Osteen's positive messages were like sweet candy, pleasant to hear, but unable to help those who were truly suffering. He asked, "When do you speak of justice? When do you challenge the wealthy? When do you call for real sacrifice?" Osteen gently replied that he wanted to uplift people, but the guest said positivity was only temporary relief and did not solve real problems. The audience began whispering. Some were uneasy, others watched closely. Everyone understood this was no simple conversation. It was a confrontation. And what followed would be even greater, because the events ahead would shake not only the church, but the entire world watching. The tension inside Lakewood Church had increased, but no one could predict what happened next. The guest speaker shifted from challenging Joel Osteen to questioning the entire model of prosperity-based Christianity. This was no longer feedback, it had become a direct accusation. He stepped slightly away from the podium and asked, "How can a church talk about abundance while the world outside is suffering?" He mentioned large churches, pastors using private jets, and services that looked more like entertainment programs than places to build faith. Then he said, "This is idolatry." The audience reacted immediately. Some people were shocked, some protested, some clapped. The cameras captured every reaction in the room. He then spoke about the reality in his home country, where many families face war, poverty, and violence, where faith is not a way to feel better, but a way to survive each day. "Where I come from, faith is survival." He said many Western missionaries arrived with promises, collected donations, and then left without creating lasting change. Meanwhile, local families prayed not to become wealthy, but simply to have a peaceful and safe night. The entire sanctuary fell silent. Then he said the sentence that caught everyone's attention. "You preach a faith of comfort, but the world needs a faith of courage." This was not just a theological debate, it was a clash between two ways of living out faith, one based on comfort and one shaped by struggle and resilience. Even Osteen's supporters were impacted. Some were emotional, some disagreed, some felt the guest was finally saying what they had thought for years. When he looked directly into the cameras, he said, "To those watching, ask yourself, does your faith cost you anything? Or is it just decoration in your life?" Social media reacted immediately. Hashtags spread quickly and videos were shared continuously. Africa News reported that the audience's reaction was unlike anything seen in recent American religious events. Around the world, pastors and believers expressed mixed opinions. Some praised him, some criticized him, but very few ignored him. Inside Lakewood, emotions kept rising. A man stood up and clapped. A woman said he had spoken in the wrong place. A group of young adults strongly agreed with him. Osteen stepped forward to calm the situation, saying the church wanted to bring hope and positivity. But the guest responded clearly, "Hope without challenge is empty." The room fell silent again. The confrontation had become a debate about the nature of faith today, between convenience and commitment, between comfort and truth. When the tension reached its highest point, he ended with, "The question is no longer what we believe, but what we are willing to become." The world had already begun reacting. Lakewood had already changed, and the night was not over. If you believe courage is essential in true faith, share your thoughts. The silence inside Lakewood Church felt like a living thing, heavy and suffocating, as the guest speaker faced Joel Osteen under the glare of studio lights. And then, with calm precision that struck harder than any shout, he asked the question that no one in that sanctuary ever imagined hearing on America's most famous stage. Is your church guided by God or by money? The words didn't echo, they slammed into the hearts of everyone present. Joel Osteen's smile wavered instantly, the polished confidence he carried for decades slipping into something raw and uncertain. His fingers tightened around the podium as if he were trying to anchor himself against a rising storm. People in the front rows leaned forward, frozen. A woman pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. A man quietly lowered his head, unable to meet the gaze now confronting the pastor. It was no longer a debate. It wasn't even an argument. It was a spiritual audit, a reckoning delivered before millions, watching at home, in restaurants, in churches, across continents. And every person sensing the weight of that moment knew that the night had changed. When Osteen finally tried to speak, his voice lacked the buoyancy he was known for. He talked about encouragement, hope, lifting people up, offering a message that carried light into dark places. But before he could steady himself, the guest responded with a clarity that sliced through the sanctuary. Love without truth becomes sentiment. Truth without sacrifice becomes ideology. But love, truth, and sacrifice together, that is courage. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The conviction behind it carried more force than any volume could. The contrast between them grew sharper, almost painful to witness. Osteen embodied comfort, reassurance, the promise that God wanted believers to flourish. The guest embodied struggle, accountability, the demand that faith must cost something, and then he delivered a line that made even the brightest lights in the building seem suddenly harsh. Christianity is not measured by the size of the sanctuary, but by the strength of the heart. A murmur spread through the crowd, not in disagreement, but in realization. People began to understand why he had come. He looked up toward the giant cross mounted above the stage and asked quietly, "If Christ were to return today, would he recognize his church?" The sanctuary froze completely. No movement, no whisper. Even the faint hum of the spotlights felt muted. That question slipped past emotion and lodged itself deep inside the conscience of everyone present. Africa News, which had been covering the event closely due to Ibrahim Traoré's growing global influence and the way Burkina Faso had become a symbol of moral resistance, described the moment as a thunderclap inside the walls of America's largest church. It was the kind of question that would replay in the minds of believers long after the broadcast ended. But the ripple effect didn't stop with the silence. Within minutes, viewers across America began reacting. Congregations in other states texted their pastors demanding answers. Longtime church members questioned why sermons had avoided difficult truths for so long. Some wondered whether Christianity in the United States had drifted toward convenience rather than conviction. Others accused megachurch culture of hiding behind polished messages that numbed the conscience instead of sharpening it. The event had thrust religious institutions into an uncomfortable spotlight, revealing cracks they had spent years trying to gloss over. And the audience that reacted most intensely both inside Lakewood and online was the younger generation. They had long harbored doubts about churches that resembled corporations more than communities. Hearing someone articulate what they could never say from the pews struck them with a sense of liberation. They wanted authenticity, not performance. They wanted honesty, not polished optimism, and for the first time, they felt someone was speaking on their behalf. Meanwhile, the international response gained momentum at a speed that stunned American commentators. Across Africa, many viewed Ibrahim Traoré's presence at Lakewood as a moment of pride, a reminder that voices from Burkina Faso and the broader continent could no longer be dismissed. In Europe, theologians debated the implications of the confrontation. In South America, pastors held emergency meetings to address congregants' questions. In the Middle East, scholars examined the cultural divide between Western expressions of faith and the realities of religious life under hardship. Africa News released commentary within hours, calling the event a rupture in the narrative of Western religious authority. Footage of the confrontation spread so rapidly that Lakewood itself began facing internal pressure. Members demanded transparency regarding finances and leadership practices. Some felt betrayed, others felt awakened. A few felt deeply conflicted, torn between loyalty to their pastor and the undeniable truth of what they had heard. Small neighborhood churches suddenly saw surges in attendance as people sought spaces where faith felt grounded, not commercialized. Bible study groups shifted focus from positivity themes to discussions centered on justice, sacrifice, and humility. The guest hadn't intended to fracture a congregation, but the truth, he spoke, exposed something fragile and buried, something that had waited too long to surface. And as Lakewood Church grappled with the fallout, one unspoken realization spread across the nation. Faith in America would not be the same after this night. The confrontation at Lakewood Church did not end when the lights dimmed or when the cameras stopped rolling. In truth, that was only the beginning. By dawn the next morning, America woke to a nation split down the middle, torn between the comfort of familiar messages and the unsettling force of a truth spoken without apology. News networks replayed the moment again and again, Joel Osteen standing beneath the bright arc of stage lights and the unflinching figure beside him, calling the American church to account. Commentators tried to frame it through politics, through theology, through culture, but none of those labels could contain the deeper tremor that had rippled through the country. Something foundational had been touched. In cities across the United States, conversations became arguments in cafes, offices, Bible study groups, and dinner tables. Some Americans defended Osteen passionately, insisting that hope and positivity had carried them through some of their darkest nights. Others argued that the guest's message shattered an illusion the country had been holding onto for too long. Radio lines jammed with callers debating whether Christianity in America had drifted so far into comfort that it no longer resembled sacrifice at all. Pastors were cornered after services by congregants demanding tougher sermons, clearer truths, and transparency that many churches had never considered offering. Even those who normally ignored religious news found themselves drawn into the cultural shockwave. Meanwhile, online spaces became battlegrounds. Clips of the confrontation circulated with millions of views. A single freeze frame of Osteen's shaken expression appeared on social media feeds around the world, paired with captions like, "The night truth entered Lakewood," or "The reckoning of American faith." And it wasn't only Americans watching. Tens of millions across Europe, Latin America, and Asia watched the exchange with a blend of disbelief and fascination. They saw not merely a theological disagreement, but the symbolic collapse of an empire of comfort built over decades. Commentators in France and Germany analyzed it as a cultural crisis. Brazil and Argentina framed it as a warning of what happens when a church forgets its roots. Australia called it the awakening America didn't ask for, but desperately needed. But no region reacted as intensely or as emotionally as Africa. Africa News published immediate commentary, calling the confrontation a turning point in how the world understands spiritual authority. Across Burkina Faso, people spoke with pride that Ibrahim Traoré, whose leadership had already shifted perceptions of the continent, had stepped into the heart of American religious power, and spoken with the conviction of a man who feared nothing but God himself. His name appeared in headlines from Lagos to Nairobi, from Dakar to Kigali. Some described him as a warrior of truth. Others called him a mirror held up to the West, reflecting back truths it had long avoided. In Burkina Faso specifically, crowds gathered in public squares to watch replays of the broadcast, analyzing every moment as if witnessing a historic declaration delivered on behalf of those whose voices were often ignored on the global stage. And it wasn't just admiration, it was resonance. Africans understood the contrast he described because they lived it, the faith born in scarcity, courage, and survival, versus the faith shaped in comfort and abundance. They recognized in Ibrahim Traoré a man refusing to let Western narratives define their spiritual landscape. They felt he had taken their lived experience and set it before the entire world, using Lakewood Church, the most unlikely ground imaginable, as the platform. Back in America, churches scrambled to respond. Some released statements reaffirming their missions, desperate to avoid being associated with the prosperity model that had just been publicly challenged. Others embraced the moment, acknowledging that they too had grown complacent and needed to return to the core teachings of humility, justice, and compassion. Small churches, often overlooked and underfunded, suddenly found themselves overflowing with new visitors seeking something real, something honest, something that didn't sparkle but instead spoke to the soul. Pastors who had preached about perseverance and sacrifice for years without large crowds finally felt seen. And yet, amid all this upheaval, one truth became undeniable. America had been forced to confront the spiritual gap between what it preached and what it lived. In Washington, political strategists watched the public reaction closely. Some feared the growing disillusionment with polished institutions, religious or otherwise. Others believed the moment validated what many voters had sensed, that the country was drifting into a culture that preferred comfort over conviction. Editorials argued that if a leader from Burkina Faso could trigger this level of introspection in the United States, then global power was shifting in a direction few had expected. The ripple continued outward until it became a wave. University professors discussed the confrontation in ethics classes. Seminaries rewrote course outlines to include debates on wealth, power, and the responsibility of spiritual leaders. Even celebrities commented, some defending Osteen, others praising Traoré's boldness. For a brief moment, the world seemed united in one shared realization. The stage at Lakewood had become the center of a global conversation about what faith truly costs. And beneath all of it, beneath the headlines, the debates, the Division I question lingered quietly, hauntingly, persistently. Had America finally met someone who told it the truth it didn't want to hear? The world was no longer looking away, and neither could the church. If you believe that courage in leadership, the kind embodied by figures like Ibrahim Traoré, is reshaping our world, I invite you to share your reflections below. Your voice matters more than ever. What shocked the world most was not the confrontation itself, but what emerged after it, something no commentator, no pastor, no political strategist could have predicted. When the broadcast ended and the crowds spilled out of Lakewood Church, many assumed the headline of the night would be the clash, the argument, or the embarrassment. But the real twist revealed itself slowly, not in the sanctuary, but in the hearts and conversations of millions who watched from afar. People had expected the institution to crumble or the pastor to fall. Instead, something much deeper happened. The silence that followed the confrontation began to expose a truth the world had been avoiding for decades. The guest had not come to destroy a church, he had come to dismantle an illusion. And as Americans sat in their cars after the service, staring through fogged windshields, they realized the message had not been an attack. It had been a mirror. For the first time in years, America was forced to consider what it had become spiritually, not through accusation, but through reflection. But the most astonishing twist was this. While many assumed the speech had been directed at Joel Osteen or the American megachurch model, the message was, in fact, aimed at a different audience altogether. Ibrahim Traoré, standing in the brightest spotlight in the United States, had been speaking just as much to Africa as he was to America. The world didn't see it immediately, but African news recognized it within hours, calling the event a declaration disguised as a confrontation. In Burkina Faso, Crowds gathered watching the replay with a level of emotion Americans could not fully understand. They saw something unmistakable. Traoré was not merely challenging Western faith, he was elevating African dignity on the global stage in a way no leader from the continent had ever done. For generations, Africa had been the receiving end of religious narratives written elsewhere. That night, the script reversed. A leader from Burkina Faso had walked into one of the most powerful sanctuaries of Western Christianity and spoken with the weight of a people who had endured suffering, colonization, poverty, and spiritual exploitation. What looked like criticism was actually reclamation. What sounded like rebuke was, in truth, emancipation. Traoré had used America's own stage to give Africa back its voice. And here lay the unexpected shift of power. Instead of weakening his global standing, the confrontation propelled Ibrahim Traoré into a new tier of international influence. Commentators who once dismissed him as a regional figure suddenly described him as the embodiment of a moral uprising. Religious scholars in Europe began citing his speech as a turning point in modern theology. Young Africans saw him as proof that courage could travel across oceans and speak without bowing. Even American analysts, reluctant at first, admitted that a leader from one of the smallest nations on earth had just redirected the global conversation about faith. The twist, then, was not about Lakewood, it was not about Osteen, it was not even about the prosperity gospel. The twist was that Africa, long underestimated, long unheard, had stepped into the center of world attention, not with wealth, not with armies, not with negotiation, but with truth. A truth carried by a man whose uncompromising presence forced the world to listen. And as the replay continued circling the globe, one realization settled quietly into the minds of millions. The balance of moral authority had shifted, and it had shifted toward a place almost no one expected: Burkina Faso. Ibrahim Traoré did not simply challenge a pastor that night, he redefined who gets to speak for the future of faith. If you feel that this moment was more than controversy, that it was a turning point for the global South, share your thoughts. Moments like this do not come twice. When the world finally absorbed what happened inside Lakewood Church, something remarkable began to unfold. People who had once moved through their faith on autopilot found themselves pausing, questioning, searching. Across the United States, quiet conversations replaced the noise, and a kind of spiritual honesty long buried beneath comfort started rising again. And far beyond America's borders, in homes from Ouagadougou to Dakar, African news reported a wave of renewed pride as millions saw Ibrahim Traoré not just as a political leader, but as a man reminding the world what dignity and conviction look like. In Burkina Faso, elders spoke of him as a bridge for the next generation, someone who proved that truth could travel from the heart of Africa to the heart of America without losing its power. The message he carried did not belong to one church or one country. It belonged to everyone, searching for a faith that demands courage, not convenience. And as Traoré himself has often said, we do not ask permission to be free, we rise and claim it. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to join a rising Burkina Faso and a rising Africa, an Africa that will never bow again. God bless Africa.